I've already said a bracha, so it doesn't matter now. But at what point am I considered to have eaten?
It's a good question. It's a good question.
No, what point have I eaten? So now I've considered eaten. I can talk.
Right. Well, you should never talk with your mouth full. I think your mother should have taught you that, if she hasn't yet. And the truth is, the halacha takes very seriously the laws of proper manners. There's a Torah prohibition called Bal Teshaktu. You're not allowed to do anything disgusting. It's very interesting. The original source speaks about eating bugs. Eating bugs is disgusting for most human society. So you're not allowed to. But it gets expanded to other disgusting practices and things which you find disgusting and others find disgusting. It's an interesting halacha to talk about. So definitely don't talk with your mouth full. So after you've had the bite, the question though was about the bracha. The bracha, you make the bracha before you eat, very good, and then you put your food in your mouth. What's considered to be eating? You have to eat. So usually it's actually imbibing the food, swallowing. So before you swallow, I would definitely not make even other motions. Of course, you're not going to speak because you have food in your mouth, and that would be disgusting. But you also shouldn't be motioning to others. You shouldn't be, doing other things. The completing the process of eating the food, I believe, is swallowing. Now, it doesn't have to be digested down to your, large intestine, the small intestine. No. It's the process of eating is considered to be finished when you swallow. Okay, anyways, welcome to David.
Thank you. Welcome.
And welcome back to myself and to the others who I understand who were out with COVID for a while. I'm still, as you can hear, I'm not 100%, but hopefully we'll fight the good fight, do what we can to learn Torah together. Ariel, you had a question.
Kind of
branching off that question. Okay.
It doesn't really happen to me very often anymore, but there were times where I forget to say the bracha.
Oh.
And I'm just,
I hate when that happens.
Yeah. So I forget to say the bracha, and I start eating the food, but then I realize I forgot to say the bracha, and what do I do at that point? Do I finish eating the food, or do I spit the food out?
That's a good question, and it relates to the previous discussion that I sort of threw in, the idea of not talking with food in your mouth. But that's a good question. Theoretically, what you should do, if you realize that you didn't say a bracha, it happens. Sometimes you forget. It's something that, every Yom Kippur and the days leading up to Yom Kippur, we say a lot of vidui.
Yes.
Right? What's vidui? Confession is usually the more precise translation. And that is part of the way we do tshuva, is to say we're sorry. And the best, the most complete way of doing that vidui is not just to say in general one word, chatanu, although that's good enough, we have sinned. But you're supposed to specify if you're really sorry about something. It's like when you say you're sorry to your friend or to your neighbor, it shows that you mean it much more if you specify what it is you realize that you have to make up for, that you did wrong. And so ideally you should specify what you did wrong. So we have these lists in the liturgy which they all follow the pattern of the Aleph Bet, which is like a symbolic sort of gesture to show everything that we've done from A to Z, as we say in English, Aleph to Taf in Hebrew. But it's very fascinating to notice which, the rabbis, whoever created this list, these lists, they thought of common sins, common things which many people, or maybe ones which are more severe. It's an interesting thing to analyze why they chose these specific sins, which are generic, right? Everybody says them. You say the text. Even if you didn't sleep with your neighbor's wife, Baruch Hashem, it's in the text. There's all sorts of, na'afnu. So hopefully it's not meant to be a directive to go and sin in all those sins in any way.
There can be specifics that come from that.
But if you analyze the list, there's quite a few. It mentions a number of times this idea that you didn't say the proper bracha properly. So your question is, what if you realize it does happen, and so every Yom Kippur, hopefully over the years, you'll get it into your mind, maybe I should be more careful about this next year so that I won't have to be each year again saying I'm sorry for this. So I try to be more and more careful about my brachot, but it's a process of learning, and I encourage you to keep trying to be more conscious of not only what you put in your mouth, but also what comes out of your mouth. That's a lot of those al chait, the confession, they have to do with things you said improperly, as well as things that you ate improperly. So, whether it's kosher or not kosher, or without a bracha, those are mentioned a lot. Let me just answer his question. I'll take your question. Just 1 second. I'm just sort of leading up to the answer to the question. So you put a piece of apple in your mouth. Yeah. Okay, let's see, put a piece, and then you realize, I didn't say Bar Priya Ha'etz. So the best thing to do, following up on what I answered to Moshe, is take the apple out of your mouth, say the bracha properly, with an empty mouth, don't talk with your mouth full, and then put the apple back in. Now for an apple, it's relatively easy, because most people wouldn't be too disgusted. Depends on how much chewing you've been doing. But if you have half a piece of apple, or an apple that's bitten into, usually it's not so bad. If you have a tissue, you spit it out, put it in your hand, make the bracha, and then put it back in. That can usually be done. But if you're having soup, that can be a little bit more dicey, and it's a problem. So because it can get disgusting, and you can't do anything disgusting. So there is a second option if you can't do the first option, and that is put the food somehow on the one side of your mouth before you swallow, because you shouldn't be swallowing before you say the bracha, and say the bracha with the food in your mouth. It's not ideal, but I think it's better than nothing. There's another option. If you have the means and you can afford to lose your mouthful of food, you spit out the food, and then you throw that food out, make the bracha, and have another bite. Have another spoonful of food, and then you're safe. You're safe, but you really shouldn't be swallowing it unless you said the bracha first. Right. Now that is another question. I'll just follow up your question with another question. Let's say you've swallowed it already. Now you just feel bad. So there is an opinion in the rishonim. Rishonim means, who can tell me what rishonim means? First. What does that mean in context of what I'm discussing now? An opinion in the rishonim, the sages. Tell me more. Who were the rishonim?
The writers of the Mishnah.
No, not the writers of the Mishnah. For that, I would say there's an opinion in Tanaim. Those are the writers of the Mishnah. And you're pointing to the Gemara, that would be Amoraim. It's an opinion in the Gemara, I would say, or the Amoraim. Ethics of the Fathers is part of the Mishnah, so that would be Tanaim. You're pointing to the poskim. You're speaking about the poskim. This is the halacha works. You're pointing to the different sections of the library, which is excellent. I'm very happy that. I think it's very educational the way we set up the library. So you should understand there's different stages in Jewish history. There's the Tanakh section, and there's the Midrash, and the Mishnah, and then there's the Gemara, and then there's the Halacha section. The Halacha section includes a vast array of books which were written, pulling the Halacha from the Talmud, creating these codes of law, but it was done throughout the centuries, since the closing of the Talmud. When was the Talmud closed, approximately? The writing of the Talmud?
700.
Good.
700.
Excellent. That's right. Excellent. Around year 700. So we're talking about 1,300 years ago. In the last 1,300 years, so there's a simple division. The first 300 years, really we call them, that's the period of the Gaonim. There's less literature from the period of the Gaonim, but that we study on a regular basis. So we could skip over that. And it's only 300 years, and just sort of the finishing of the Talmud, you could say. But really, after the close of the Talmud, there's two major periods. It's very simple. 1,000 years, 500 each. First 500 years is called the earlier commentators, rishonim. Second, that's year 1000 through 1500. And the second 500 years, from 1500 to 2000, is called the acharonim, the later commentaries. So, as we've discussed many times, the earlier the commentary is, the earlier the sage is, the rabbi is, the closer he is to what? That's right, to Har Sinai, really. I mean, it's closer to the Talmud, and the Talmud is closer to the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is closer to Anshe Knesset HaGdolah, the second temple period. That's closer to the first temple period, where we have the prophets, and that, we all know that was a chain. Moshe Kibel Torah Sinai. Who remembers? Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, and he gave it over to, beginning of Pirkei Avot, Moshe, be with us. Gave it over to Yoshua, and Yoshua to the elders, and the elders to the prophets. Prophets, right? It's Kelim Nevi'im. Nevi'im is Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. And then they brought us to the period of what we call Rabbinic Judaism, right? The period of Chazal, our sages. Okay? So the Rishonim, those first 500 years, 1000 to 1500, whatever they write. No, you're pointing the wrong part. So you pointed to the right part, because there's Rishonim commentaries on the Talmud, so they're in the Talmud books, but there's Rishonim who wrote codes of law. Give me an example. Rambam, exactly. We've studied it many times. And give me an Acharon who's a code of law. We study it also every day. No, he's sort of on the border. Mishnah Berurah is an Acharon, but also the yellow books we've been learning. He's an Acharon. Right? The question is today, right? Rabbis alive today. Well, we're clearly not Tanaim or Amoraim, because we didn't write the Mishnah or the Gemara. We're not Gaonim, although some people are. We call them a genius. A Gaon just means a genius. But in the context, Gaon refers to only those people in the period of the end of the first millennium. The years of 700 to 1000. So we're not Geonim. Are we Rishonim? Are we Rishonim? Of course not. Where does the period of Rishonim end? 15. With Rav Yosef Karo, pretty much, he's on the border. So we're not Rishonim. What's left? Maybe we're called Achronim. Some people say that after year 2000, we're Achronei Achronim. It's like a separate period of the later authorities. But essentially, that's sort of artificial. But we are all Achronim. Everybody sitting here today, we're part of the later commentaries. You want to write a commentary on Torah? You want to write a book on Halacha? So this is part of the Achronim section. Yes?
You could use like the founding of services like YouTube as like a dividing point. Like
maybe, yes, sure.
Like the pre-YouTube Robs and the post-YouTube Robs. Rabbi, because no, it's like YouTube is.
I have a better suggestion. I understand your suggestion. Sometimes the medium defines the character, and so I'm not rejecting your suggestion, but there were other. Sorry.
So the Rob's rejecting my suggestion.
But I want to maybe try to fine-tune it. A lot of people have noticed that in our era, the last 100 years or 200 years, also in secular knowledge, the type of scholarship has changed. Many people call our era the era of encyclopedias. This idea of sort of systemizing and categorizing knowledge. And not, there's also, it goes together hand in hand with specialization, but there's also, the flip side of the specialization is this sort of attempt to have a comprehensive understanding of Judaism. So for example, one of the seminal works, which is still being finished today, even though they're up to volume 42 or something, is called the Encyclopedia Talmudit, the Talmudic Encyclopedia. We have a few volumes here somewhere, but only the first 4, I think, were translated to English very poorly, by the way, unfortunately. But in any case, the Hebrew edition is going to be finished within the next year. How do I know that? Because after this is a 50-year-old project. 50-year-old project. Yeah, Rav Kook was involved in the founding of the project a long time ago. No, the father. It was yeah. It's unbelievable. It's really the idea was in the 30s. It started in the 30s. So it's in maybe a 70-year project. Anyways, and it's just really outrageous that it hasn't been finished. But the funder who decided to give the money to this is really it's a groundbreaking, revolutionary type of book for the Jewish history, really, Jewish Talmudic learning to be organized in, encyclopedia entries in a way which is so systematic, almost scientific, is a revolution in the way people think, the way we learn, the way we study, the way we think of things nowadays. And so maybe that's the new era. That's why I'm getting to maybe we're in the era of like scientific or categorization or classification type of Judaism. And many books that are written today, it's not like they have such novel insights in depth. Some do, of course, there's those kind of works, but mostly what you have is collections. Collect everything said on this topic throughout the 1,000 years of history. There's lots of those. So people say we're the melaktim. Melaktim is collectors. That's the categorization of after the achronim, we're the melaktim. We're just collecting and try everything that was before us. Now we have the ability, maybe because of computers, because of all sorts of. But I think it's much more than that. I think it has to do with the way we think. Also, we have this capacity to try to put everything together and in a framework, and just have all of knowledge, almost like a librarian type of activity, more so than was ever in history. So that's where maybe the achronim, maybe we're the melaktim, whatever we are. We'll let the historians define us. We'll try to learn Torah. And in terms of the book, how do I know it's going to come out? Because the funder, who about 1.5 years ago said, I'm willing to fund till the end of this project, but you have to finish it within 1.5 years. Or I'm not giving you a cent. And so they hired tons and tons of scholars who are sitting throughout the country and Chutz La'aretz as well. And they're trying to finish this thing up. And every year they're coming out with another volume. You don't know if they're going to make 1.5 years, but it's being worked on very intensively. Hopefully we'll see it in our days soon. Yes, Moshe.
The point I was trying to make was more about accessibility, because just think about 100 years ago, it really wasn't accessible for the everyday.
For sure.
Yeah, you had to have at least you had to have a postal address and stuff to get magazines or something. But now it's like think about it, Joe Schmo Jew can go on YouTube, put a shiur on in the background while he's doing. And
he can click a few buttons and get all the books in the world shipped to him without lifting his finger. Yeah. In most of the Middle Ages and beyond, and even to the modern era, till 100 years ago, the greatest rabbis, many of them didn't have a complete set of Shas. I know it's hard to believe, but they didn't have all the volumes of the Talmud. Now, everybody that gets married, he's bought for the Chatan gets a present, the entire Talmud. You have it on your phone in your pocket at all times. I think that goes together. What you're saying goes together with that. What I was saying, that this capacity to see to collect all the material that's available to us now. We have libraries, we have digital devices. There's something called Hebrew books you might have heard of. There's something called Otzar Gaonim you might have heard of, which collects just hundreds of thousands of Hebrew books. You could actually see the texts, PDFs online at any moment in your pocket. It's unbelievable access, wealth of knowledge. So the attempt to try to put that all together and somehow do something with it, that's our job. I think that's our job in our generation. But anyways, what I was going back to the laws of Brachot, just to continue with our discussion here about eating. If you did swallow, chas v'chalila, without saying a bracha, it could happen. there is an opinion in the rishonim. Now, do you understand what that means? There's an opinion in the rishonim and the earlier commentators in the Talmud, where they vary, exactly, it's very high level of authority. One of the opinions of the rishonim is that if you make the bracha immediately after eating the food, it's also kosher. I believe it's the Ran, Rabbeinu Nisim from. Interesting. I'd love to see that. I don't recall it that way. But, okay, great. So, but we don't rely on that lechatchila. So what you do is after you finish swallowing, make a bracha, but then have another bite. So then, either way you're covered. Either the bracha follows the bracha. If you make it closely right after you ate, it's good enough according to the Ran, and also you're going to have another bite. So that's
kind of defeat the purpose of a bracha rishona.
it does, but you stepped in it, as they say. It's your own fault. You ate without making a bracha rishona. So you want to say no tshuva. You're just going to burn in hell. There's nothing you can do. Bevakasha, I'll go sit over there. You come sit here, and I hope you have success finding students. But the halacha is very aware that sometimes things happen.
Right.
Stuff happens, as they say. And so we have a corrective. We have something you can do to.
Cover the first one. The first one should not be covered.
So
It should be covered by a bracha afrona.
it's really just a question of theory now. It's a question of perspective. I could say to you, there's nothing to do with the bite you took. You're going to have to just burn in hell, right? But I'm saying to you, perhaps there is a little bit of a corrective if you make the bracha afterwards. According to some opinions in the rishonim, you get covered by the bracha that you say afterwards. So you don't want me to give you any ray of light to the poor sinner? Okay, I won't.
There's the practical application that even if you say it afterwards, you're still practicing.
Practicing is not really. Practice is important, but it has to be, in the right context, and
Is it permissible
can't separate.
to say the bracha achona if you haven't said the bracha?
That's a good question. It's a good question. There's important to realize that there's no connection. I wouldn't say no connection. There's very little connection between the bracha that you said before the food and the bracha you said after food. Even if you said no bracha, you had an entire meal, and then afterwards you say, oh no, I didn't make the bracha rishona. I wasn't thinking. I was too hungry. I was tired, whatever it is, and I didn't say my blessings before the food. It in no way affects your obligation to say the blessing after the food. If you had a kazait of bread, you have to say Birkat HaMazon. If you had a kazait of cakes and cookies, you have to say the Ala Michya, the Mein Shalosh, etc., etc. And if you had a drink of water, and there was, ravit of water, you have to say Borei Nefashot. Those are the rules, and it's regardless of whether you said the bracha rishona. Okay. Other questions?
I got one.
Yeah.
Which is the right way to perform the Kiddush? Standing or sitting?
Kiddush. It's a good question. What have you seen?
I saw the people standing for the evening and then sitting in the lunch. I heard that the Catholics sit in the boat of the.
Right.
Which is the one right?
So they're all right. There's different opinions, obviously. It's a very common custom to stand for the Kiddush on Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
It has something to do with a little bit of a level of Torah called Remez. You know that there's 4 levels of Torah? 4 types of Torah? Yeah, well, Pardes, right? Pardes.
Oh, yeah.
Pardes is the fourth.
What does it stand for? No, this is the acronym. P stands for Pshat, which is the simple reading. Remez is the one I'm referring to. That's a hint. And then Drash, sorry, it's a D. Drash and Sod. Sod is the mystical, hidden parts way of reading the Torah and our tradition. And so there's a little bit of a remez involved in this idea of standing for Kiddush. Because when you start off Kiddush, how does it start? How does Kiddush start? What are the first few words of Kiddush? Okay. What do most people start the Kiddush? Not Vayer Vayboker.
You mean like right at the beginning? The
How does it start? No, Kiddush itself. Yom HaShishi, right? So Yom HaShishi. And then it goes Vayechulu Hashamayim, etc. Right? So that's afterwards. You have the Borei Pri Hagafen and then the bracha. But we start off by saying this preamble. Of course, what passage? What part of the Torah does this come from?
This is from Genesis.
What part of Genesis?
Brachot.
Yeah.
2?
Exactly. According to the Christian division, the first 6 days are in chapter 1. Chapter 2 starts Shabbat. That's a very strange division. Of course, in Jewish tradition, it's anathema. It's crazy. We know that the Shabbat, the 7th day, is the culmination of the 6. But it's no question that this is the beginning of the next chapter. The next paragraph, at least. Even if you don't call it chapter 2, you can still call it chapter 1. It's still a new paragraph, and it talks about the 7th day, right? And it starts with Vayechulu Hashamayim, and the heavens and the earth were completed. That's what Vayechulu means, like kol. Everything was completed. Vayechulu Hashamayim. Now, that means that this Yom HaShishi, this is the standard notation for the end of a pasuk. It's the end of the previous pasuk. How does the previous pasuk go? Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker, Yom HaShishi, which is really the end of a sentence, which is about the 6th day. 6th day man was created, right? God blessed him. And then the 7th day starts with Vayechulu, so it's a strange phenomenon. Why do we start the Kidus with the end of the previous paragraph, speaking about the 6th day? It's unfortunate, actually. Many people, many secular Israelis, they call the Friday night meal Leil Shishi, like we say, Friday night in English. But it's and why do they think it's this is Leil Shishi meal? Because we start off the Kiddush saying Yom HaShishi, but really no, Yom HaShishi is finished with. Now we're starting off the 7th day. It's the Shabbat meal. So what's going on here? Anybody know why we start off with the last 2 words of the previous sentence?
I mean, I could imagine that because we do preparations right before Shabbat.
Nice idea. I don't think that's the original idea. I don't know what the original idea is, but I've never heard that one. So we're celebrating now Shabbat, not the preparations. We're starting Shabbat.
That and starting this.
Okay, it is connecting the 6 days of the week to the 7th. I hear that. Okay. Cute. But it's really, it's strange. It's strange. So the truth is, I believe the tradition started because of this level of Torah. It's called Remez. Now we find this phenomenon in the beginning of many books and many essays, whereas we always want to start off with the name of God. The name of God, a Yud over here, a Hey over here, a Vav over here, and a Hey over here.
It's genius.
So we want to start off with the name of God, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. And so that's why the custom became, instead of just starting Vayechulu, which talks about the Shabbat, we add 2 words before it. If you notice that they have the name of God. Now, if you're starting off with the name of God, you should stand up in honor of the name of God. And that's where the custom came, to stand up in the honor of, you're welcoming in the Shabbat, but you're also welcoming in the Shekhinah, the divine presence. So now, this is that's why many people stand for Kiddush. I'll answer your question, and I want to say one more thing about this. Although most brachot should be recited sitting down, especially brachot when you're having a meal, because that makes it more permanent, it's more set. So you really should be sitting down. But we need to stand. So that's where it becomes a tension.
I heard even that some people, when there is the bracha, they sit down.
That's it. So some people, they stand for the first half, which is reciting Vayechulu, and then when they're about to say the bracha on the Borei Pri Hagafen, they sit. You've seen that? Some people do that. They do half-half. It's fascinating. And then I never really Maybe some people sit for the whole thing and they just ignore this whole hint thing.
That's my family. We just sit the whole.
You sit the whole thing? Is that right? Interesting. Okay, so
We
yeah.
don't pour the wine into everyone's cup. We just pour wine into everyone's cup, and that's it. It's not from like the cup that the Kidus was made of.
I understand, that's not connected. Those are two separate questions, whether you sit or stand and pouring out the wine. But let me just finish with this Kiddush thing. So that's why there's different customs. So my custom, my father, he would stand for the whole thing. So stand for the whole thing. The daytime Kiddush is different because you don't have this whole Vayechulu and the name of God, and really there's not much to the daytime Kiddush except for the Bari Priya Gafen. We say all sorts of verses beforehand, but none of them have this special name of God. And so really, ideally, you should be sitting for the daytime Kiddush. There is a custom that developed in some communities to stand for the daytime Kiddush as well. Maybe it's a sign of respect. But ideally, you should be sitting because you're supposed to be, it's the start of a meal. You have to have Kiddush at a meal. And you don't really stand at a meal. So I sort of changed my father's custom a little bit in that during the daytime Kiddush, I sit. At nighttime, I still stand. But in the daytime, I can't really find a good reason to justify that. And sometimes I do stand, but hopefully my father forgives me. I'm trying to be holier than thou, which is not a good thing to do. But whatever. Okay, maybe I need to do tshuva. Ideally, halachically, it's better to sit.
Okay.
For sure, for the daytime Kiddush.
What about when you actually say the bracha for the wine? I see always people standing up.
That's it. A lot of people do it. So it must be,
then right before they drink, everyone's
at least for drinking, that's the least you can do is sit for the drinking. Some people don't even do that. They drink standing up. That's, I think, what did my grandmother say? If you eat or drink standing up, it goes to your legs, right? Anyways, ideally you should be sitting to make it more permanent, part of the meal. But there are different customs when it comes to the Friday night. Also, daytime, there's different customs. Yeah. Some people stand for the Kiddush. They even drink it standing, but ideally you should be sitting. Now, getting back to this strange sort of addition of Yom HaShishi, which you're just adding because you want to get the name of God hinted to, it's very problematic. Because you're not allowed to quote half of a verse. It's a prohibition. You can't cut up a verse that's in the Torah. We have a tradition about how to start a verse, how to end a verse, and you never quote half a verse. If you quote half a verse, you have to say the entire thing. So some people say, well, that's why I start Vayier Vayiboker, and then I see Yom HaShishi. So it's in the Sidurim. Many times it has Vayier Vayiboker Yom HaShishi, because you don't want to just quote two words. The only problem with that is, of course, that's not the beginning of the verse either. There's a whole sentence before Vayier Vayiboker Yom HaShishi. It's only those are the last 6 words, but the verse is I think 16 words. And so some people, you'll see it in some Sidurim, they have the full verse, all 16 words. Sorry? No, that's something else. That's about Shema. That's something else. But anyways, that's the full answer about the Kiddush. But do you stand? Do you sit? Follow your custom.
So why is it allowed to have only the last 6 words in the verse in some theory? And
it's not really allowed, but it's a custom that developed.
We should.
Well, we keep customs, even if they're hard to justify. Customs are very important. Maybe they knew something that we don't, and so sometimes I say the Vayir Vayivoker. Sometimes I don't, because it doesn't really solve the problem. You know what I'm saying? The problem is saying Yom HaShishi, but I'm going to say Yom HaShishi, of course. That's the way Kiddush starts, and it's the name of God, and it's I'm not going to... But I understand if somebody else would not have, or have a different custom, maybe there's some Yemenite custom, or some other group, which starts off their Kiddush, Vayechulu Hashamayim. That would make the most sense, and do the whole thing sitting down. That would make sense. But I think 90% of Jewry, 99% of Jewry start with the Yom HaShishi, Vayechulu Hashamayim. Even though they're 2 separate paragraphs, and you're joining them together. Because it's nice to recognize the name of God when you're welcoming in Shabbat. Okay, another question? We went from issue to issue, but we're sort of just saying hello, and the topic was going to be the laws of brachot in any case. So Moshe started us off with about taking a bite, and the bracha rishona, it said a little bit about what happens if you have a mouthful and you make a mistake, and then we talked a little bit about bracha achrona, and now Kidus is a very special situation. Standing or sitting. Ariel, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah. So does it matter if you're standing or sitting when you put on tefillin?
Everything matters. In Judaism, every little detail is mandated, and there's good reasons, and we've been thinking about these. You know, you could say it's a sign of the times in some ways. Maybe it's in one ways it's constricting. If all of your religious life revolves around the rituals, well, maybe it's only because we didn't have an army, we didn't have a state, and we didn't have an economy, we didn't have, a system of government that we had to take care of. Torah is very wide, and we should be practicing our religious life in all these areas. And you could say, well, we didn't have those for thousands of years, so we focused only on the rituals. On the other hand, it makes every little movement that you do in Judaism very rich with many meanings and analysis. So there's a lot of discussion about each particular bracha. Should it be said standing? Should it be said sitting? Specifically regarding the tefillin, there's a machloket. I think that there's a specific custom with Sephardi Jews.
So I
do
see
half. What do you do? The first part you do standing, and then the second part sitting.
The first part you sit.
Yeah.
Oh, first.
You put your tummy down.
Yeah.
And you put your hands around.
Sitting
you
down.
Stand up and you put your head down.
You stand for the head filling. I
There's
see.
also only the one bracha unless you talk
Down
in between.
tefillin and then stand up to that.
Got it. Right. Where the Ashkenazi custom, I believe, is to stand for the whole process.
Also, I don't wear clothes yet. So.
Either way. But so and there's reasons for both of those. There's reasons for both of those customs, but that takes us even farther afield. So we won't talk. We talked about the laws of Kiddush. We won't talk about the laws of tefillin. I can't recall right now as well. It's not fresh in my mind exactly the machloket between sitting and standing for the Sephardim and Ashkenazim about the lahaniach tefillin. I think it goes back to something we said before about having a meal. Sitting down is more permanent, more settled. So it could be that the Sephardi tradition of sitting for laying on the tefillin, they feel in that way you're more settled. In general, all the brachot should be said in the way that's the most conducive to concentration. Yeah. And usually that involves sitting down. If you're going to think about something, you're going to work on something, you want to have a serious discussion, and you want to have your full capacity, usually you sit down. Aids concentration. So that's also best with brachot as well. I know we're very used to in our Western culture, eating on the run and grabbing a bite and fast food and all that, but it's really a little bit not proper when it comes to the way we treat our brachot that we say and the food that we eat, let alone going down to your feet, like I was saying before. But the Talmud actually says you cannot call someone a Talmud Chacham if you ever see him. Like I think it says that if there's a Talmud Chacham, somebody who's considered to be God-fearing and a scholar of Torah, and you see him eating in the street, that disqualifies him.
But that's talking about bread. It's not talking about everything.
I'm not sure. Really, the concept is the same. That eating is something that's private and something that's serious, and to eat in public, we all know that's considered to be rude in some circumstances. So, in the days of the Talmud, in a more formal society, you could imagine that. I mean, we're so used to that. You go by the falafel stand, and maybe there's a stool outside, or maybe you just standing around and eating a piece of pizza or whatever it is. That's acceptable in our society, but in the Talmudic times, this was not acceptable. This was considered to be rude. And if you're rude, you can't be a Talmud Chacham. You can't get that title, that high stature. So you should be careful not to eat in public.
But if it's considered not rude now, then would that still?
Yeah, I think that there's some impact on that. I think it's definitely less severe. But I know people that are very careful about that, even today. Even though it's much more accepted in society, I could see how, it makes sense that not everybody is... you wouldn't see the Queen of England eating in the pizza in the street, right? Right? So you wouldn't see the chief rabbi or the president. The president doesn't go ahead and, although in America, they actually often go to
They try to make themselves look really
the
down
barbecue
to earth.
and looking down to earth,
They try to
right,
make themselves
right,
look really down to earth. So,
right.
Back in the pickup
Close the
truck,
entire block.
eating a hot dog.
Society's become much less formal. Yeah. Good morning, Hirsch. Good to see you. Okay, thank you. Yes, Thomas. Yes.
What about drinking in the street? Like from a bottle of water?
Yeah. Drinking alcohol in a bar.
You can't drink alcohol unless it's Shabbat.
Drinking in the street. But by the way, this whole concept of having restaurants, you go to have a meal in a restaurant, it's also a relatively modern phenomenon. There was, it could be, but I mean, there's other people around that are not your family, so that's not so private. Although you're inside a building and you're sitting down, so it's less. But there's some people that don't eat outside their homes. They feel so. So drinking in the street, I think it's less of an issue.
Alcohol or drinking like water? And coffee?
Just water.
Okay.
And here we are drinking coffee. But we're inside. But I think it's less obviously, impolite. Although, many people would still consider it to be impolite to drink from a bottle. You pour from the bottle into a cup, right? If you go to a hotel, they don't give you just a can of Coke. They give you a glass. You're supposed to, or even a beer. Some people drink the beer from the bottle, but that's not so necessarily acceptable in all societies. You drink from a glass, not from a bottle. Mm-hmm. So putting a bottle to your lips, it depends on society. So I think, as we were saying, society has changed a lot in terms of the formality of it. But I don't think we have to necessarily try to revive all the formality of Victorian England. Wear top hats and say ta-ta, good morning, and the women should curtsy and bow. I think sure, I can see how you're getting into that, but
why not?
So societies can change and they can have their different standards, but you have to always, I think, if you're a Talmud Chacham, if you're a Torah-fearing Jew, and you represent God in society, somebody who's connected to Judaism, make sure you're always on the higher level of society, not the lower level of society, right? The ruffians who are, drinking beer on the park bench, or they're drinking the alcohol out of a paper bag, you know what I'm talking about, right? That's not appropriate for a Talmud Chacham, even though some people do it. We're supposed to shoot for more composure and more respectability, and not less. It's hard to put your finger on it. Every society is a little different. But as I said, in the times of the Talmud, it was much, much more strict about ever eating fast food. I think there's many people today, religious Jews, who won't eat fast food in the street. Even if they do they'll go out to a restaurant and sit inside the restaurant, but not sit on the street. There's different levels, but it's hard to put your finger on. All right? Okay. We're going to stop here for today, even though I'll give it a little bit I need a few more minutes of break in between the classes to take care of myself a little better. Not 100% yet. But I'm glad to be here with you. We started. We're going to keep learning together. Yofi. Shakach.